Well, someone pinch me, I must be dreaming. Big news just dropped out of nowhere, it feels, considering we just had episode 3 of the Living World season just dropped. The devs have announced something awesome, a summertime festival that many of us haven't seen for years and years and years. That's right, it's what you can see in the title, the return of the Zephyr Sanctum and the Labyrinthine Cliffs and the Crown Pavillion. Almost a double release, if you will. And my god, it sent people into a bit of a frenzy. So if you guys don't know what this is and you're particularly scratching your head at the footage in the background, let me explain. Way back when, shortly after Guild Wars 2 came out, the devs had a bizarre and crazy idea for how to do streaming content known as Living World Season 1. They put a ton of stuff into the MMO and then removed it really quickly. The idea being that the world was always changing and evolving and people should keep it installed and playing regularly so they can get everything. But what that meant was we had lots of interesting releases, areas of the world to explore, content to play that then was never touchable again. Some of that content has been revived where possible. So some of the dungeons that were added have now been reintegrated through fractals. Many of the rewards have been dumped onto random vendors around the world, but a lot of it still isn't there. Some of that did include festivals, and indeed it seemed way when the game first came out, the devs were trying with Living World Season 1 to add a lot of festivals and then repeatedly bring them back. But that all kind of went kaput when they ended up blowing up Lion's Arch and shifted their ideas entirely when Season 2 came out and they went with the expansion format. So, a couple of the very notable releases that we've never been able to touch again were the Crown Pavillion and the Zephyrite Sanctum. Both are pieces of content that have only been available for a couple of weeks at a time, twice, I think, ever throughout the history of the game. Maybe we've been to the Crown Pavillion 3 times, I can't quite remember anymore, but definitely with the Zephyrite Sanctum, it's only twice. These are areas of the world, maps that you could explore with characters you can interact with. They've just been sealed off forevermore until this reveal here. So let's just get the word from the devs right away, and there's even an interview that they've released with some really interesting information. So check it out. Festival of the Four Winds begins next week. I mean, they're telling us and then it's coming in just 1 week. They say on July 24th, a big summer celebration is blowing in. It's the Festival of the Four Winds, a collaborative effort by Her Royal Majesty Queen Jenna of Krita, the Zephyrite, the Lion Guard, and even the Black Lion Trading Company. This annual festival brings back popular summertime activities in both Divinity's Reach and the Labyrinthine Cliffs. So, it's set into two, they say annual there, which might seem a bit laughable as we read it here, considering it's been years and years and years since it's ever come back. But I guess what that's telling us is this time next year in 2019 and beyond, this will now be a regular thing, much like we see for Winter's Day and Halloween. They wanted to slot that summer festival in there. The original game never really had a great summer festival either, for what it's worth, but they did bring Winter's Day back in the summer months. Well, now we've got this. So, there are two parts. You've got the Crown Pavillion, which is Queen Jenna herself will preside over the festivities in Divinity's Reach, where ambitious contenders can do battle in the Crown Pavillion to earn prestige and rewards. Join the boss Blitz melee to take down vicious villains. Vicious villains and their contemptible compatriots are represented by the new, improved, and entirely secure Watch Night Mark II systems, and compete in one-on-one matchups with the notorious challengers in the Queen's Gauntlet. If you guys don't know what this is, don't worry, I'll explain all of it in a second. Then the other half is the Labyrinthine Cliffs, which also comes almost like a double release. And they say traders, crafters, and other compelling and mysterious individuals have gathered for the Bazaar of the Four Winds. Relax on the beach, hunt for sky crystals, barter for goods, or just engage in a little quiet people watching. Be sure to take your Griffin for a spin around the cliffs and give the Zephyrite a warm welcome back. To get in the festival spirit, we put together an asset kit with nostalgic Festival of the Four Winds art, wallpapers, and music, along with some new screenshots which you can download here. Now, that you guys are going to look at all those assets, you're going to be hearing the music and stuff in the background of the video. Also, accompanying it, as I said, you might be scratching your head, is some really crappy looking footage. Well, that's my old footage from like 2013, where unfortunately I wasn't so good and didn't pay as much attention to putting really high quality stuff out. So we're kind of stuck with that for today, but next video where I'm talking about this, it can be the full 1440p, 60, blah, blah, blah. And I'm such a geek that that's one of the big reasons I'm really excited to come back here, just so we can get it in a kind of high quality. So before we go to the interview where the devs do clarify a lot of other little facts about this. There are a few things that I want to talk about just so that we are all fully on the page of why this is exciting. It's not just going to be exciting for a nostalgia bomb for those old people who want to go back. It's not just going to be exciting for the many people who won't have ever experienced it at all, but also we have to deal with the fact that now we're talking about Guild Wars 2 with masteries, with mounts, with all kinds of new capability, even gliding, that means that the devs have to go and update this stuff. A lot of this was before, say, even break bars were in the game. So let's run through what we can remember about each individual thing. Let's talk about the Divinity's Reach side stuff. So yeah, it's called the Crown Pavillion. If you guys have been to the Festival District through any of the festivals, you know, Halloween and Winter's Day have stuff there, you'll notice that giant pit below the Eagle. It's a room down there. You're very unlikely to have gone in unless you're a very long-term player. And basically the idea is it's 6, I think it was, different large regions, like perhaps pens in a zoo, but just very big ones, filled with different themed enemies. So you'd have like centaurs in one section, and maybe you'd have Dredge, was it Dredge? In another, and you'd have a ton of different enemies in another section. And the whole idea was it was embracing the idea of Zerg farming, something Living World Season 1 did a lot of. You'd get a ton of players together in a squad of guilds, say, you'd all trigger a big event and you'd charge around killing champions and getting loot from them. Back then, it was all about champion bags, which were kind of new to the game and generally were one of the main places you could get a lot of profit. And a lot of people look back on it fondly. It's very much a grind fest, but it's kind of one of those large mob style things that people always smile and look back at if that's your particular style of gameplay you enjoy. And people got a lot of money from it. So the question is now in 2018, how will they have updated that? How will they have updated the enemies that we're fighting, what the enemies can do? How will they contend with all the power creep that's gone into the game since the elite 2 waves of elite specializations and just core updates have gone through power creeping things, more stats that are available to people and more precise ways that people are supporting in Zergs. All of that's going to be quite interesting. I wonder whether we'll see stuff from, say, Path of Fire bounty system crossing over, because that was their most recent big hurrah at that kind of Zerg style farm content to its success or its failures. And so you got all of that to think about, but then also, not only was it the big farm down lower, but you could also go up into, say, the scaffolding high up and participate in solo content where you as an individual would go into a floating arena and you'd have to take out a specific boss on your own while under the effects of various gambits and different penalties that would restrict the kind of things you can do in the fights. And slowly you would take on tougher and tougher foes until there was a really difficult challenge at the end. Liadri the Concealing Light, I think was her name. Now, this last aspect also could earn you some money, but is the thing that I most look fondly back on. It was really the first time, I think, that PvE Guild Wars 2 showed its chops and said, hey, we know how to make good, challenging content. It was kind of like, if you will, a precursor to what you experience in Fractals and Raids these days. It was the first time we got really high quality, decent stuff, and a lot of people failed to even take out the last boss and complete the whole thing. It was that hard and grueling. I wonder now what that will be like in 2018 when so many more players understand Buildcraft and do raid and do play Fractals and do get these things a bit more. Plus, we have so much more opportunity and breadth of things that our classes can do because there's more elite specializations and stuff. So just how they've updated those will be curious. Even the break bar thing, again, were there break bars on those bosses in the past? I don't think so. So will they reincorporate that? It could be a lot of work to bring all of this back in a way that's really honoring what it was like back in 2013. Moving away from Divinity's Reach, there is obviously the Labyrinthine Cliffs 2, which is a small zone in the Shiver Peaks, very remote from everywhere else in the game. Actually, funnily enough, quite close to where one of the Path of Fire maps takes you. And how the devs will have updated this. Now, the interview will go into it more, but again, remember, we have mounts, and they even invite us to fly around on the Griffin. There's a lot of water around there as well. I guess the skimmer would be pretty interesting. But what was prominent about this was it was when the devs first really started looking at freedom of movement. This was when we first started getting to play with Zephyrite crystals you could still interact with in Drytop and whatnot. But if you go back to Drytop now with your mounts, with your Springer and whatnot, Drytop feels really unfun and tiny and silly as a map now, just because we bypass so much of the experience with our mounts. And I wonder whether the Labyrinthine Cliffs will suffer in the same way, or the devs will really try to embrace that. And we'll get a quote from them in a second. There's also some other stuff too, which I have so little memory of. There was an economic aspect to the Labyrinthine Cliffs. When they originally brought it in, they had specific vendors and things that would trade stuff to try and balance areas of the economy that were inflated or deflated. And I wonder whether the devs will try and do something like that again. There was an aspect arena that I have almost no clue how it worked, that I'm curious to see if they're bringing that back. There are the story implications too. The Zephyrhites have really been in a weird place ever since Dry Top came out, ever since that idea that their fleet was shot down. They've been touched on a little bit in POF, they've been touched on a little bit during Heart of Thorns, but what exactly is going on with them? I think now that they're back as a full-fledged festival, the devs have to do some good story explaining what's going on there, and especially if you're playing stuff to do with the most recent patches, including Aurene. I mean, these are the Zephyrhites. They're the successors to the Brotherhood of the Dragon. It was their song that was the first hint Glint was going to be a big part of the Guild Wars 2 story, as well as the Guild Wars 1 story, beyond what we saw in the novels. And, you know, all of that stuff was fascinating and amazing last time we got to go here. The story has moved so far forward, there's going to have to be some nods to what's going on there, and I'm looking forward to see what they do. Lastly, yes, they mentioned the Griffin, but let's not forget, we did just have episode 3, where we did just get the roller beetle. Now, I know this is supposed to be an annual festival, and we can't expect it to integrate too much, but this is also where the Zephyrite race came from, which you can play all year round as an activity. But do you think it would be a missed opportunity from the devs if they didn't update that race and give us a good roller beetle race with this release? Come on, it would work so perfectly. What if we go in reverse on the roller beetle, backwards down that course we were originally going up with the crystal shards? That'd be great. Well, so there you go. Those are some of my initial thoughts. Let's go to the interview, which does clarify a lot of these topics I've been skirting around here. The two devs in question are Matthew Medina and Joe Kimmers. I always forget how to say his name. That's a designer and the team lead for the festivals and I guess current events and all that good stuff. A full link to this in written form is in the description, and all credit to Gashiok. I think that's how you say their name. They're a very long-standing pillar of Guild Wars 2, and it's very cool to see them get in this article. So, yeah, they say, why bring back Festival of the Four Winds in particular? To which their response is, looking at our current yearly festivals, we had a large gap across the summer months. There's been interest for a long time in filling that hole in the schedule, and Festival of the Four Winds was the natural choice. It has a variety of activities for different types of players, and the individual components of the festival have recurred before, showing that it has the depth to repeat yearly. Matthew chimes in saying, as the team looked at adding a summer festival to our annual rotation of festival events, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to return to one of our most beloved summer playgrounds, the Festival of the Four Winds. And it really is beloved. You guys might be looking at this video and thinking, is this a lot of hype and hysteria for the community for no reason? It could just be the nostalgia of the fact we haven't played it for a long time, but they genuinely really were good releases that stood head and shoulders among a lot of the other stuff that was going in Living World Season 1. This was really where Living World Season 1 hit its stride, if you ask me, looking back. Anyway, they say, what new challenges are we going to see with the return of the Bazaar? And Joe says, I see the Bazaar and the Labyrinthine Cliffs as being all about movement and exploration. We've added multiple adventures, races, and scavenger hunts to the zone for players who want to climb around the vertical space, as well as a new meta event modeled on Amnoon's Casino Blitz. That's a lot of stuff. So, if you guys don't remember, this map did have a lot of small dynamic events constantly firing away. I guess the new meta might replace some of that stuff that might not be appropriate anymore. But you hear what he says about scavenger hunts there. You might be thinking, what's a scavenger hunt? Well, again, this was one of the earlier releases where the devs did this, but they initially had a big achievement collection you could do, where you have to explore all the nooks and crannies of the map, finding hidden crystals in all these different niches, and some of them were really well hidden. Well, again, with mounts, you have to pay a lot of reverence and care to where they've been implemented now, because what once upon a time may have been a really interesting jumping puzzle to get to a certain place is now just press the spacebar and you're there. So I guess when they say scavenger hunts, that stuff's been updated to include the fact that mounts might be a part of this. It's weird to think of a core account trying to get maximum value out of the festival, though, so I wonder exactly where the balance is. But look at how much stuff he's pluralized there. Multiple adventures? Don't forget that the Roller Beetle adventure from the most recent release was awesome, and the Griffin adventures have always been awesome, and they've been doing double of those each patch. He says races, too. Races, plural. There's got to be Roller Beetle stuff here. And I guess rewards associated with the new Amnoon Casino Blitz style thing. Matthew says there are a number of new activities, adventures, events, and exploration challenges throughout the festival. So it doesn't seem like they've just sort of slapped in and we'll be getting a complete rehash. Even though a rehash would be kind of okay since it's been so many years, it's not like it would be a grind to us anymore. They've really given it a lot of treatment. Next question says, Guild Wars 2 tech has moved on significantly since we last saw the Zephyrite. Did this pose particular challenges with the new and old content? Joe says, a large portion of our work on Festival of the Four Winds has been to bring the old content up to modern standards, as well as fixing bugs that have built up over time. In the Crown Pavillion, for example, one of our programmers rebuilt the Queen's Gauntlet queue system almost from scratch due to engine optimizations that had unknowingly broken while the content was shelved. Doesn't that almost sound like a copy-paste for the statements they offered when Super Adventure Box finally returned after its long hiatus? Yeah, curse those optimizations, right guys? Some things worked out more easy than expected, however. We changed Labyrinthine Cliffs to allow mounts and gliders, and since the freedom of movement in that zone was already very high, it didn't need as many fixes as some of the other maps have required to accommodate the highly mobile mounts. Matthew says, yes, as a matter of fact, we did have some challenges adapting the aspect skills to play nicely with mounts. So aspect skills are the crystals you can pick up that gave you those movement abilities. And Matthew adds that we ended up rebuilding them. It was also a boon to us because we were able to modernize a lot of the scripts and technology that was years out of date, such as those for certain events, but we were also able to add new types of content to the map that didn't exist before. So I think OCX players will be quite happy with this. Back in the day, all the old launch pads and things they used were really impacted by ping and latency, and ever since Heart of Thorns, when they refined things for how gliding works, they pay a lot more attention to that stuff now, and hopefully those in OCX will have more fun in these releases, because even I, as an EU citizen who plays across the Atlantic in NA servers often, could feel a bit of that, and people in OCX territories had it like twice as bad. But yeah, also you can catch, he did mention that you'd be able to use those aspect skills with mounts. So that will be interesting to see too. Can we turbocharge a Springer's jump by using an aspect jump while on the Springer? Terry has moved on just as much. Glint is dead, the Master of Peace is no longer around, and the Zephyrite suffered a massive loss just prior to Heart of Thorns. Do we get to find out how all of this impacts the Bazaar and its inhabitants? This bit is possibly one of the most exciting responses for me. Joe says yes! Matthew Medina, and remember, Matthew has been very much involved with a lot of story-oriented stuff in previous releases, who we now see has been a part of this team for this revival. Matthew did an incredible job adding new scenes, dialogue, and life to the Bazaar. You'll find a number of characters to learn about the state of the Zephyrite from, as well as memorials to their losses over the course of the story. One of the other elements that appealed to me about revisiting the Festival of the Four Winds was the Zephyrite's presence in the festival. They've been in a slightly nebulous state since Season 2, and it felt like a good opportunity to revisit them and let players discover how they've been recovering. And the devs are totally right about this. It was only, it feels like, a few months ago where I was discussing this at length while in Siren's Landing on a stream about how weird and odd it is that the Zephyrite, such a big, crucial part of this story, in some ways, have just been left hanging. It's a bit like how many Sylvari players felt about the Pale Tree and the Grove before they got the Khalid Bolg epilogue current event quest chain, which also was from this team, by the way. Matthew says, there is a light story wrapper for the festival that definitely catches players up on what the Zephyrite have been up to since Drytop, and there is some additional lore and character moments that touch on the main story. But for the most part, we constructed the festival's story content to be standalone, since it's available to players from all over the game. And it will be available in subsequent years as well, I suppose, must have been on their minds. So Matthew kind of tempers the expectations there a little bit. I guess this means we won't get any really explicit stuff where Aureen's flying in at the festival and experiencing things, and we see how the Zephyrite respond to her. He says a light story wrapper. So what this probably means is when we start the content, we'll get a bit of plot. When we end the content, we'll get a little bit of plot, maybe something like that. You might find as well that over on the Crown Pavillion side, we get an opportunity maybe to meet with Logan and talk about the pact a bit, but probably not much because, yeah, it has to be independent of current Living World releases. Just a couple more questions here then. Are we going to find humanity has any new enemies in this round of the Gauntlet? Joe says, indeed, this was another opportunity we saw based on events in the Living Story. When the Crown Pavillion ran previously, it claimed to showcase triumphs against the enemies of humanity and Kryta. but there was a notable absence. So this, by the way, guys, is why we saw like centaurs there, as I gave as an example before. It may have been a wish to not disturb the peace or meddling from the ministry, but the pavilion didn't feature the notorious White Mantle cult, who have since returned from the shadows and has been roundly defeated by the players. They're now present in a historical recreation form in the pavilion, taking over a section from the ogres. The ogres, of course, not really being a prominent enemy of the Crichtons. Maybe a little bit more in Ascalon and the Ebon Hawk people, but yeah, that was nebulous at best. We've also added a new tier of challenges to the Queen's Gauntlet. 5 one-on-one bosses that the players will be able to challenge in any order once they've beaten the first normal tier. These bosses are tuned to be obstacles for even players who have been diligently training their skills since the last Gauntlet, and I'm looking forward to seeing them in action from the spectator ring. This is going to be great, guys. They've tuned it up to actually challenge people of the quality that you can get in Guild Wars now. Oh, it's going to be fantastic. Sanctum Sprint. This is the final question. Has still got to be one of my favorite activities. The question is, who out of you has the best time? Joe says, we may have to schedule a team playtest to settle this, but since Guild Wars 1, I've had a strong affinity and track record for the racing activities, so I humbly ask for your support, and Matthew says, I'm going to be in last place, guaranteed. Alright, he's got a strong affinity for races. Does this mean a legitimate roller beetle race incoming? It's going to be great, guys. You've also got to consider, too, that once this festival is over, the Zephyrhites will be presumably airborne again and off to trade with distant regions, which could be a slight, subtle, nice little way for the devs to tease at maybe even the next expansion that could be a year and a half away now. Path of Fire's release becoming more of a distant memory as the days go by. So there you go. That's most of the information. There might be other little interviews bobbing around. If there are, I'd love you guys to point them out in the comments for people. I reckon we've got most of the meat here, though, and it's just 1 week away. I don't have too many more closing thoughts for you there. I think they've been pretty comprehensive there. I will add that people who followed Shaman and the world of data mining very closely may have been tipped off that this was happening, as Shaman noted publicly that there had been several asset updates related to props we'll find in this release. And the other thing that I'm quite excited about is that this does mean they are still paying attention and have Living World Season 1 in mind. And I don't want to see it all just botched, kind of come back where it wouldn't be appropriate. But this makes a lot of sense, that these get turned into proper festivals, just as SAB was revived. These have been revived too now. And I'd love to see that they keep looking at Season 1 and we get a real reintegration of the whole thing eventually. It means so much for new players coming into this game to have a coherent, proper narrative. And maybe this is another step slightly more towards that. I'd like to think so anyway. So I'll leave you there, guys. Finally, if you check the description, there will be a link to the interview you just read, but also I'll throw you a couple of links to some old videos I made on this content. Some of the stuff you've been looking at in the background, what I had to say about it, and the full details there, where I'm sure I remembered a hell of a lot more than I do speaking to you now in 2018. So let me know what you think, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back for more soon, including a lot of AFC and stream content, which I promise is coming. The devs have said so much about Guild Wars 1 and some of the back end on these releases that I've still not shared with you that I think is really fascinating and could speak volumes of things to come. So keep an eye out for that. Cheers, guys. I'll see you shortly.